oral food, oral health, dan lain-lain. Nah, teman-teman, hari ini kita akan jelasin lebih banyak apa sih manfaat Fruitflow. Karena Fruitflow selama ini, orang kalau ngomongin subarasi selalu jelasin tentang marine placenta aja ya. Ada marine placenta, sarden peptide juga kita belum bahas secara dalam. Nah, hari ini kita akan bahas tentang Fruitflow. Apa sih manfaat dari Fruitflow ini? Sehebat apa sih Fruitflow ini? Karena kan kita kalau ngomongin subarasi selalu ngomongin marine placenta aja. Bener nggak sih? Nah, nanti kita akan apa model Zoom kita ini nanti ada juga ada Bu Wanda Kalista, dia adalah account manager DSM Indonesia yang akan bantu translatein kita. Jadi teman-teman hari ini kita banyak banget bintang-bintang tamunya, ada dari Jepang, ada dari Norwegia, ada dari Swiss satu-satu ya. Teman-teman hari ini kita akan mulai Zoom ini karena kita harus on yang akan bantu translate kita di AFC. Nah, buat pertanyaan hari ini nggak ada, tapi saya udah tanya tim-tim dokter dari AFC apa yang hal dia mau tanya. Nanti saya akan tanyain kenapa nggak ada open question, karena presentasi ini kurang lebih akan makan waktu hampir 2 jam, teman-teman. 2 jam ya. Jadi untuk menghargai waktu kita semua, untuk komitmen waktu, kita menyimak dulu aja ya teman-teman ya. Kalian nyimak semuanya karena nanti kita akan bikin siaran ulangnya lagi. So, teman-teman kita mudah-mudahan bisa welcoming dulu semuanya. Nah, dimulai dari Pak Ernest Prayuda sebagai CEO dari AFC Indonesia, dia akan opening semuanya. Oke, teman-teman. Silakan Pak Ernest.
Oke, halo semua, apa kabar? Wah, kangen ya. Saya udah lama nggak Zoom sama teman-teman semua ya. Saya tadi lihat video yang Bali, luar biasa teman-teman ya. Di situ saya selalu merinding melihat acara di Bali teman-teman ya. Sorry, cerita dikit bahwa di Bali ini kita memang AFC memang yang paling berani ya teman-teman ya. Sementara orang lain takut ngadain acara, kita adain acara. Tapi acaranya juga nggak sembrono teman-teman. Kita pakai Satgas COVID dan lain-lain, sampai ada 2 menteri yang bicara teman-teman. Itu hal yang belum pernah terjadi sebelumnya teman-teman. Nah di AFC kenapa kita selalu berani teman-teman, karena kita mau jadi pionir, apapun kita mau jadi pionir teman-teman ya. Saya memang cukup sedih dengan keadaan kondisi seperti saat ini. Saya masih di Bali teman-teman, belum pulang. Saya sedih banget melihat kondisi-kondisi di Indonesia ya teman-teman, sangat prihatin. Cuman kita nggak bisa berhenti bermimpi, kita nggak bisa berhenti untuk terus progres teman-teman. Karena siapa yang berpuas diri, siapa yang berhenti progres, dia akan mati di tengah jalan ya teman-teman ya. Nah, salah satu komitmen kita adalah kita sementara orang lain susah, sementara perusahaan lain tutup, pegawai dirumahkan, tidak bekerja, gaji dipotong ya teman-teman ya. Kita bangun AFC, Geraha AFC di Bali teman-teman, which is salah satu convention terbesar di Bali, di daerah Kuta teman-teman ya. Tempatnya keren sekali, sangat besar. Kita acquire buat AFC. Jadi nanti teman-teman kita ada acara-acara apa di sana ya teman-teman ya. Kalau masih ada yang di Bali, teman-teman nanti mampir. Saya hampir setiap hari weekday ada di sana ya teman-teman. Kita tidak akan berhenti progres teman-teman. Nah, saya mau bicara hari ini, saya excited banget di hari ini banyak orang-orang ahlinya teman-teman ya. Kita adain seminar, ada Profesor Asim, ada Taichi yang PhD teman-teman, ada Mr. Rudy. Ini semua orang-orang yang super teman-teman ya. Mereka adalah expert di bidangnya. Ini bukan orang-orang sembarangan. Dan saya happy sekali kita bisa bergabung, mereka bisa support kita dengan seminar hari ini. Kita akan mengenal lebih dalam Fruitflow. Nah, Fruitflow ini bahan yang super luar biasa teman-teman, dan hanya kemurahan Tuhan yang bisa membuat kita di Indonesia menjadi pionir. Kita adalah salah satu-satunya di Indonesia yang pegang Fruitflow di produknya gitu teman-teman ya, dan kita mendapatkan hak eksklusif juga untuk di Indonesia teman-teman. Nah ini bukan sekedar tomat biasa teman-teman, teman-teman pelajarin kenapa kita bilang ini luar biasa teman-teman ya. Ini kemarin saya bicara sama Wanda, ini Rudy katanya selalu bingung kalau Indonesia ini demand-nya sangat super banyak. Dia mesti kolek tomat itu katanya dari petani tomat tuh berton-ton teman-teman, hanya untuk Indonesia. Nah tomat ini berbeda teman-teman ya, bukan cuman tomat-tomatan ya teman, bukan semua tomat dipakai, tapi ada bahan sangat sedikit seperti gelnya yang menutupi biji dari tomat, itu yang dipakai teman-teman. Jadi kebayang satu buah subarasi seperti ini berapa banyak tomat yang dipakai untuk satu produk. Nah sebenarnya teman-teman di awal Jepang itu agak reluctant apa ya, kayak nggak pengen. AFC Jepang itu kan mereka bilang, wah kita kalau bahan-bahan baku yang utama itu harus dari Jepang, harus dari AFC. Nah, dan belum pernah mereka biasanya terima produk atas nama AFC, produk dari Eropa gitu ya, bahan aktif dari Eropa. Itu sulit buat mereka. Tapi hanya dengan kemurahan Tuhan, melalui teman-teman kita bisa ngelobi, akhirnya bisa kita dapat hak eksklusif dan AFC juga mau menerima Fruitflow untuk ada di dalam produk ini ya teman-teman. Ini super luar biasa loh teman-teman. Ada beberapa MLM di dunia, di Amerika itu ya, hanya menjual Fruitflow saja. Sedangkan kita ada SOP yang selalu, yang sudah, ini ya, kita kan dari dulu kan selalu ya, ini gitu ya. Sekarang selalu cerita manfaat marine placenta. Nah, hari ini kita mau lihat lebih dalam bahwa ada bahan aktif lebih sama dahsyatnya teman-teman. Bahkan di Eropa sendiri orang sudah nggak pakai aspirin lagi, mereka pakai Fruitflow ini teman-teman untuk kontrol blood flow. Nah kita belajar aja dari ahlinya, saya nggak mau lama-lama teman-teman, saya cuma mau ucapin teman-teman dengerin hari ini ya, pelajarin hari ini. Cuman hari ini saya mau bilang kita bawa para ahli yang luar biasa teman-teman. Kalau di AFC nggak kaleng-kaleng teman-teman, ini semua expert daripada expertnya teman-teman ya. Oke, gitu aja dari saya, nggak panjang-panjang, teman-teman saksikan ya. Thank you semua, God bless you.
Oke, thank you Pak Ernest untuk pembukaannya. So, thank you again for everyone to come to the webinar. So, tanpa berlama-lama lagi, we would like to welcome Mr. Taichi Inui to present everything about cardiovascular health. Then we will continue to Mr. Rudy, jadi akan di-continue presentasinya ke Mr. Rudy, kemudian untuk perkenalan Fruitflow, kemudian akan continued to Professor Asim. Jadi bagi member semua, selamat menyaksikan. Okay. So, Taichi, please.
Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello from Tokyo. It's a pleasure to be part of this forum, and I'm very excited to see so many of you are joining today. Today, as everyone has mentioned, that we will hear about the importance of circulation and then how Fruitflow can work to facilitate that heart health. But before we hear from Rudy and then Professor Asim, I would like to spend 3 slides and remind us why we should care about circulation. I am sure for those of us who are joining today are very conscious about our own health and our loved ones, but at the same time, it is sometimes complex, and this is why I kind of wanted to give us a refresher on why we should care about this specific element of health. Next slide, please. Healthy blood vessel is a key for healthy blood flow and then circulation, which delivers the nutrients to tissues and then cells in our body, and then thus keeping them in a good shape. Blood vessels is like a garden hose. You water your plants with a garden hose, whereas you water your cells with blood vessels. We want our garden hose and blood vessels flexible, soft, and clog-free, so it can do its job the best, whereas the rigid, old, brittle, or clogged or kinked garden hose can break or sometimes cannot even deliver the nutrients or the water to where we want it to be. Blood vessel is very similar. You want to keep it soft and inflexible to work as it's designed. Next slide, please. This slide shows you the proportion of that health issues in Indonesia. You see 4 bands from the bottom, 30s and 40s. Up next is 50s, and then up next is 60s, and then the top bar is 70s plus years old. What you see is that proportion of health issues contributed by cardiovascular disease, which is in a darker pink, is increasing as we age. Also, we see that the prevalence of diabetes, which is in the lavender color, is also increasing as we age. And many of you are probably aware that diabetes is also a risk factor for cardiovascular health. So in a nutshell, in Indonesia, like everywhere else in the world, the issue of cardiovascular health only increases as we age. And I forgot to mention that this is the data taken from 2019 WHO Global Burden of Disease data. And we actually see a very similar trend, not only in Indonesia, but globally, as well as in the Asia Pacific region. Next slide, please. There are multiple steps for a healthy cardiovascular system, as there are multiple functions and the mechanism that we can keep them healthy. We're not going to cover all of them, but we'll be covering one of the less spotlight aspect of the blood flow and how maintaining a healthy platelet can contribute to a good blood flow, and then how Fruitflow, a proprietary ingredient, can help us to do so. I hope you enjoy the seminar today, and then thank you very much for joining again. And I'll now hand it over to Rudy.
Thank you, Taichi. Selamat siang, Mr. Ernest and the AFC family. Thank you so much for offering us to present today the science and the background of Fruitflow. What I'm going to do quickly is give you a little bit of history, and then we will switch to the main speaker today, Professor Asim Duttaroy. Next slide, please. Fruitflow, and that's important for the AFC family, is a very strongly scientifically supported product that has received in Europe a so-called European Food Safety Agency opinion, and the European Commission has approved officially that we can claim the benefits of the product Fruitflow. And that's where the story started 8-9 years ago. So we started to introduce the product to many European Union countries. And we did a successful introduction over there. And in the meantime, we have approached other markets. And that's why we are also today speaking to all of you. Next slide, please. The most important, and I choose a slide that everybody can probably understand easily, the most important for all of us is that we have a blood flow that has its way in and out. And the picture here that you are seeing is basically showing a very simple way how blood flow should work. On the left, you see all these blockages. That's where we actually see issues as described already a little bit by Taichi, and more to come from Professor Asim. But we would like to have a blood flow that is more in line with what we see to the right. So these type of pictures will help you when you speak to colleagues and friends to explain the benefits of Fruitflow. Please use the picture in a simplified marketing way. Next, please. The story, and we will share more, has been introduced by many scientists. I have a few so-called medical and general practitioner that have been quite famous in Europe and in UK. So there are a number of videos that you can access. Some of them are listed here. And yes, the product has been in the media. Next slide, please. You can find online a lot of information, but also in newspapers like the ones shown here, British, European, other countries, France, Italy, Germany, newspapers talking about the success and the benefit of Fruitflow. Next slide, please. Now we are, of course, very proud, and thanks again, Mr. Ernest and the AFC family, that Subarashi is the very first product in Indonesia where we are using the Fruitflow science and its benefit. And we are also proud that we can collaborate with AFC and Mr. Ernest, and we are sure we can develop all this to a very successful story as a joint collaboration. So for you, important to know, then we will switch to the scientific part. You have to take 4 to 5 sachets a day to see the benefit. And I think it's important that you stick to these rules, because you need this amount to really see the benefits that we will discuss in a moment. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to introduce the most important speaker today, which is Professor Asim Duttaroy. And I really want to take a minute to give you a bit background about he has been in the scientific area and field for many, many years. He started to publish. Researchers, they typically publish if they are out there and want to tell what they found in their research. So the first paper Asim published 1984. And basically what Asim did, he really studied over the many, many years the roles of food components, such as Fruitflow, and the development in terms of primary prevention of diseases such as cardiovascular diseases. So he has published many, many papers around this. He has also been very active around omega-3s. And at the same time, being a researcher, in his case, he's also a teacher. He's a professor, and he teaches medical and clinical nutrition at the University of Oslo. There he supervises medical students, doctors, and their publications. Asim is also a chief editor of a clinical journal called Food and Nutrition Research, where he helps many people to research and publish their papers. Asim has been active in publications. Many of his papers have been out there and can be searched online or via research channels. There are more than, in the meantime, 250, I think in the meantime, even 260 research papers. He has also published many books and book chapters around his specific interest on components in clinical nutrition, components in primary prevention. So now we give the stage to Professor Asim Duttaroy, and we'll listen to his talk.
Right. So, really, before we continue to Professor Asim, it's better for me to do a short translation from your Tai Chi's, from yours
Please.
and also Tai Chi's presentation. Jadi Bapak Ibu sekalian, saya di sini untuk mentranslate apa yang tadi sekiranya sudah disampaikan sama sama Mr. Tai Chi and Mr. Rudy. Jadi balik ke sebelum kita ke Profesor Asim, kita bahas dulu mengenai betapa penting kesehatan jantung atau kesehatan pembuluh darah kita. Jadi anggap di sini adalah sebuah selang ya, sebuah selang di taman atau di taman kita. Jadi anggap ini adalah pembuluh darah. Kita mau pembuluh darah kita soft, lembut ya, tidak kaku dan tidak ada penyumbatan. Supaya nutrisi, oksigen yang masuk ke dalam tubuh kita dapat disebarkan luas secara merata ke seluruh tubuhnya kita. Jadi penting bahwa untuk kita menjaga kesehatan pembuluh darah kita. Nah, kemudian kalau kita melihat data WHO tentang beban penyakit global dari tahun 2019, kita bisa lihat di Indonesia dari umur 30 sampai 70 tahun memiliki resiko kardiovaskular yang tinggi. Dan resiko ini seiring berjalannya umur meningkat. Jadi bisa dilihat dari umur 30 ke 50 ke 60 tuh semakin tebal chartnya. Begitu juga dengan diabetes yang di warna lavender atau lilac ya. Ini juga seiring berjalannya waktu, berjalannya umur juga semakin meningkat. Jadi bisa dibilang bahwa kesehatan jantung dan kardiovaskular merupakan masalah kesehatan utama yang ada di Indonesia. Nah, kemudian ada multiple steps, ada beberapa langkah untuk menjaga kesehatan kardiovaskular kita. Hari ini kita tidak akan bahas semua, yang kita akan bahas adalah kesehatan aliran darah, which is adalah hal yang mungkin sering kita lupa. Oh ya, ternyata aliran darah kita tuh perlu juga dijaga. Kesehatan trombosit kita itu juga harus dijaga supaya trombosit kita tidak menjadi hiperaktif. Seperti itu. Nah, kemudian selain kesehatan aliran darah, fungsi kardiak, lemak darah, tekanan darah, dan kesehatan pembuluh darah itu juga harus kita jaga dengan nutrisi-nutrisi yang sudah tercantum di sini. Dan untuk menjaga aliran darah, Fruitflow adalah salah satu ingredient yang bisa membantu kita mencegah dari penyakit-penyakit yang berkaitan dengan aliran darah. Kemudian kembali untuk mengenai Fruitflow sendiri, Fruitflow adalah solusi alami pertama yang dibuktikan secara ilmiah untuk aliran darah yang sehat. Jadi klaim ini sudah diperbolehkan di EFSA, atau European Food Safety Authority. Jadi simple ngomongnya ini seperti BPOM di Indonesia. Nah, ini BPOM-nya di Europe. Gitu. Dan jadi kalau di Europe sudah boleh klaim bahwa Fruitflow bisa menjaga aliran darah yang sehat. Nah, kemudian kita maunya aliran darah kita tuh seperti apa sih? Nah, jangan sampai aliran darah kita tuh seperti yang di kiri ya, banyak sumbatan ya. Kita maunya seperti di kanan. Memang agak macet, tapi yang penting lancar jalan. Ya, jadi jangan sampai ada penyumbatan di sini. Nah, kemudian untuk Fruitflow sendiri sudah banyak didukung atau di-endorse oleh banyak medical dokter ya di Inggris, dan ini adalah video-videonya, mungkin kami juga bisa share linknya kalau misalnya dibutuhkan, nanti ke Pak Niko atau ke Pak Ernest kami bisa share supaya mungkin bisa dilihat bahwa Fruitflow sangat dipercaya di Europe. Kemudian untuk di media juga sudah mungkin ribuan artikel mengenai Fruitflow di media Europe dan juga di Amerika mengenai kehebatan si tomato ekstrak ini. Dan Fruitflow di SOP Subarashi seperti yang sudah dikatakan sama Mr. Rudy bahwa ya Fruitflow adalah yang pertama di produk SOP Subarashi. Jadi SOP Subarashi ini adalah produk yang mengandung Fruitflow pertama di Indonesia. Gitu. Jadi untuk mencapai semua manfaat dan uji klinis yang nanti akan disampaikan oleh Profesor Asim, itu sampai bisa dikonsumsi 4-5 saset per hari. Begitu. Dan ya, ini adalah kolaborasi pertama, bukan berarti ini kolaborasi terakhir dengan IFC Japan, DSM dan IFC Indonesia, DSM dan IFC Indonesia akan terus berkolaborasi untuk produk-produk yang super selanjutnya. Kemudian sebelum saya ke Profesor Asim, sedikit mengenai Profesor Asim, bahwa beliau sudah bekerja melakukan penelitian sejak tahun 1984. Memang banyak penelitian yang dilakukan dari buah-buahan dan sayur-sayuran, dan kemudian juga penyakit darah atau penyakit kardiovaskular. Kemudian beliau sekarang mengajar nutrisi medis dan klinis dan mengawasi 35 mahasiswa PhD dan medical doctor ya. Jadi calon dokter juga diawasi oleh Profesor Asim. Dan Profesor Asim sekarang adalah pemimpin redaksi dari Food and Nutrition Research Journal. Dan Profesor Asim juga sudah menulis lebih dari 250 makalah penelitian dan buku. So, thank you. This is the part from DSM. So, we would like to welcome Professor Asim to present and introduce us about Fruitflow. So, the place is yours, Professor Asim.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, AFC Indonesia, DSM Indonesia, and Rudy for introducing me to this audience. And today, what I'll do, I will talk about the story behind the development of taking tomatoes to the heart. But these days we know that it is much more than that, because initial knowledge about platelet is all about thrombosis, blood clotting, etc., etc. But the more data are coming now, because of COVID problems and others, that platelet plays more additional role when it comes to COVID patients. And there are different segmental role of platelet. One is hemostatic role that I'll talk later, how the Fruitflow is helping, and also other medication. And then the major part of platelet actually is now showing that it is involved so intimately in terms of viral replication, viral immunity against virus, it depends. And then how it becomes a major indication or diagnostic or prognostic test for COVID patients, say for example, D-dimer, etc. And how platelet becomes a central topic or important part in diagnosis or predicting the mortality of COVID patient. And today, as we speak, Indonesia is suffering a lot in terms of COVID infection and mortality. And I sympathize with this, the people there. And hopefully, I think the situation will get better. So with much ado, I will share the screen now and start talking about what I'll be talking today. First thing, can you see the slide well now? Hello? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, we can, Asim.
Okay, thank you. As you see, I'm now sitting in my university hospital office. That is outside window, the slide showing. It's a very good summer here in Norway. Generally, it's a very cold country. And as you see, the title I mentioned is a platelet hyperactivity in COVID patients. And how or why, how or whether Fruitflow, that is we're talking about today, can be used as one of the regime to protect and prevent this sort of problem that we see, apart from breathing troubles in COVID patients. And of course, platelet hyperactivity can happen in different conditions because of sedentary lifestyle, diabetes, obesity, etc. But also we now know, and it is known, any viral infection, there is a platelet hyperactivity as a result, as influenza, dengue fever, even HIV, etc. So I'll talk about the mechanistic eating, and then I will take you there where we can see that Fruitflow can be very helpful to this sort of situation. Before now, I go to the second, next slide. If you look at next slide, this is very interesting. There are a lot of, cardiovascular disease, as a lot of speakers mentioned, that it is one of the major issues all over the world, still today, even Indonesia. And if you look at the different risk factor of cardiovascular disease, hypertension, high blood cholesterol, etc., there are 200 risk factors. But when you go details into this, say, for example, blood cholesterol, you would see this is a Framingham study in this cartoon. The conclusion of this cartoon is saying that 80% of the people who develop cardiovascular disease have the same blood cholesterol values as those who don't develop it. So, and if you look at this graph or cartoon at the right side, you see the yellow without myocardial infarction, cardiac attack, and there is no difference. So that means there are other factors that we don't know, which actually involve in cardiovascular situation. And of course, cholesterol is a problem, but not problem for everybody. If you go to the Mediterranean people, you will find they have a cholesterol, they smoke, they don't suffer that much cardiovascular problem, as you see with the similar situation in America or Asia, because they have taken different kind of dietary things, say, for example, olive oil, tomato, etc., and other things. So that what I'm trying to say, it is a very complicated situation. And if you look at the most important thing in cardiovascular system is the blood flow. And that's why the whole heart is functioning, and there is a lot of blood vessel network. And if you put vessels together, it is around 62,000 miles. The earth can be covered 3 times, actually, diameter. That big, that's a long blood vessels we have in our body. And that means during whole the blood vessel, the blood has to move. and come. And they have to take the oxygen from the heart and giving it to the different tissues and nutrients and bringing back all the waste product and do that. In order to do that, the blood vessel must be very clean, must be refractile, so because blood has billions of cells, red blood cell, neutrophils, eosinophils, platelet, etc., etc. They have a different time, lifetime. From minute to second to minute, and red blood cell 3 months, platelet 10 days, and they do different jobs that we know a little bit, and it is beyond the scope of today. I'm not going to do that. What I'm trying to say that this blood vessel is very important, and if the blood vessel and microcapillary is not there, then we have a problem because we don't get the oxygen and nutrition, and tissue can die, and that's a big problem. And if you see the left side, then with the time we develop a plaque or fatty streak, and then there is a narrowing of the blood vessels, and then there's a big problem, and ultimately it call it atherosclerosis, and there is a coronary event in stroke and all these things. And we have billions of platelets that I'll be talking about it later, more details. It is kind of a drone. It's a reconnaissance flight. What it does, it travels around the body. And when it travels around the body, it looks for any kind of non-smoothness or discontinuity. If you cut the vessel, then platelet will rush there and will aggregate and stop the blood bleeding. So blood cannot come out of the body, and then it will seal, and then it will repair through different mechanisms. Its main job is to maintain the integrity of the blood vessels, and this is the job. And it is a kind of a reconnaissance flight. It has all the materials in it so that it can do this job with the help of other cells and etc. So it is a kind of autonomous, sensing, very intelligent cells, but it does not have a nucleus. That will come later on. So what happens, this platelet, if this aggregate in a wrong place, wrong time, we have a stroke or heart attack. So this is a main problem. And if you go to the next slide, this is showing a kind of a cartoon where I showed in the left side, the endothelium, the blood vessel surface is smooth, and then the platelet are also smooth and non-active. They are floating around and doing their job. But when the platelet sees this is a broken vessels in terms of cut or a plaque formation, or because of smoking, inflammation, vessel wall is activated, then it will also activate. It will aggregate, it will bring back so many cells together and make a kind of a cell. And this is very important for us to survive, because if the blood comes out of the body, we will not survive. The blood pressure will fall, etc. So it's the main job is very important to maintain the integrity and to repair the cells and maintain the patency so blood flow can go on. And important is blood flow because blood is a thixotropic fluid. If its density is increases, if the flow is less, then it will try to, velocity will be less and a big problem will come. So the main thing is to keep the vessel wall clean so blood can flow, it can go to the brain so we can think and we can survive better, go to the skin so skin can be better, it can go everywhere wherever our body is and needed in proximity and also the upper system. So it's very important. And if you look at this one here, and this is a blood vessel base I show there. There are a lot of compound like von Willebrand factor, collagen, etc. buried inside the vessel wall, you see. And the platelet moves fantastically. But this vessel wall and collagen, etc. Collagen can express. If we cut the vessel wall, then collagen will activate the platelet and platelet will come and do that. And von Willebrand factor is another protein, can come out of the membrane. It can come if the coronavirus attacks, then von Willebrand factor will be expressed and platelet will be activated. That will come later on. So under normal conditions, this endothelium must be very smooth and platelet can move around and maintain the body physiology. But it doesn't happen always like this because of different situation. Because of bad diet, because of intake of saturated fatty acid, because of sedentary lifestyle, because of smoke, because of diabetes and pollution, etc. that goes inside the blood and then I can activate platelet as well as the endothelium. And as you see, there are a lot of, kind of a bumper is popping up from inside the vessel wall, and then try to deter the blood flow. This is a question. And that means the platelet will come, sit, and it will ask for other cells to come because it sees there's a danger there. It doesn't know the cause of it, but it knows something is happening in the vessel wall, damage, and platelet will come and make a seal, etc., etc. And that can, if it happens in the coronary circulation, then we have a problem. If it happens in the brain, we have a problem. And if it is happen when it is needed, like we have a vessel wall is damaged, then it is okay. So these sort of things, if happens untimely, in a wrong place, it's a disease and can lead to death. And if it is happening when the physiology is important, when the vessel wall is damaged, and platelet will come and do that. So this is a very important fine balance of platelet and endothelium that is occurring all the time. And as I see it, so show it here, that this is a blood vessels and the blood flow is there. And if there is a docking system is activated because of different expression of adhesive factors on the endothelium, on the blood vessels, then there is rolling would be a problem. And the blood flow will be less and less, and there is a big problem, as we see in a situation like cardiovascular disease and diabetes, etc., etc. Now, question is how and why it is happening, and we know that in a pre-diabetic condition, hypertensive condition, hyperlipidemic condition, smoking, high-fat diets, all these conditions, platelet become active. We call it hyperactive. In a normal condition, platelet is a shiny, smooth cell. It moves around. But whenever it gets activated because of this situation of the in the body, then it releases so many factors like epinephrine, serotonin, substance P-selectin, etc. And then they try to activate the blood vessel wall. And that is a creation. That's why it is involved in atherosclerotic processes. And when there is a huge activation of platelet aggregation, then it can lead to arrhythmia. It produces so many things, as you see here, myocardial dysfunction, and also it can produce serotonin, reactive oxygen species, thromboxane A2, and the vascular smooth muscle become constricted, and it happens. And then you have a plaque rupture that happens that can lead to big problems. And these are the conditions I cataloged that lead to hyperactive platelet. That is diabetes, insulin resistance, obesity, aging, old people, overnutrition, bad diet, sedentary lifestyle, pollution, also important issue, and COVID-19 that I'll be discussing in the third part of my lecture in the details, and oxidative stress, inflammation, drugs, cancer, and all these things, platelet become hyperactive. The question is really that under this condition, then all this lead to platelet hyperactivity, that lead to atherosclerosis. That's a long time situation where platelet is activated and producing these things and producing atherosclerosis, then ultimately CVD, etc. happens. Now, the question is that how we can avoid this sort of situation, because platelet become active and we don't have a drug, we cannot use it. I'll talk in the second part. Now somebody will summarize this talk in whatever I said so far in Bhasha. So I'm stopping it here and someone will be talking now. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Professor. So, saya di sini untuk merangkum tadi apa yang sudah disampaikan oleh Profesor Asim, bahwa key takeaway-nya adalah bahwa kolesterol, itu kalau misalnya Bapak Ibu pergi ngecek kolesterol di darah, itu bukan satu-satunya faktor yang mempengaruhi aliran darah. Karena tadi kita lihat di presentasinya bahwa 80% orang yang memiliki kadar kolesterol darah itu belum tentu punya resiko kardiovaskular. Jadi 80% orang yang punya penyakit kardiovaskular itu punya level kolesterol yang sama orang-orang yang tidak punya penyakit kardiovaskular. Itu highlight yang, jadi apa sih yang kita mesti cek? Nah, kemudian di darah kita ini ada yang namanya trombosit. Nah, kalau misalnya ibu bapak tahu semua, trombosit itu adalah sel penting yang ada dalam darah kita untuk mencegah pendarahan. Jadi simpelnya kalau darah kita luka, kalau kulit kita luka, kalau kulit kita luka, ada sel trombosit yang membantu supaya darah kita tidak mengalir keluar atau membantu penggumpalan darah di daerah yang luka, external bleeding ataupun internal bleeding. Namun trombosit ini bisa menjadi hiperaktif, ya. Jadi tidak ada kondisi luka pun dia bisa menjadi aktif di dalam darah kita. Nah, kalau misalnya trombosit menjadi hiperaktif di dalam darah kita, dia akan lengket satu sama lain dan menempel di dinding sel kita dan akhirnya menyebabkan yang dinamai aterosklerosis atau penyumbatan dalam darah. Nah, apa sih sebenarnya yang menyebabkan si trombosit ini menjadi hiperaktif? Satu, bisa jadi karena diabetes, kemudian memang ada kondisi hipertensi, ya. Kemudian kebanyakan duduk itu juga bisa menyebabkan trombosit, ya, menyebabkan trombosit yang hiperaktif, ya. Jadi kemudian beberapa lifestyle yang kita pilih, misalnya high fat diet, kemudian kebanyakan gula, itu juga dapat menyebabkan kondisi trombosit yang hiperaktif. Ya, jadi kondisi yang trombosit yang hiperaktif akhirnya dapat menyebabkan resiko penyakit kardiovaskular. Dan kita tidak akan pernah tahu, ya, kita nggak akan pernah merasa itu non-simptomatik, darah kita ngental nggak ya, darah kita, trombosit kita hiperaktif nggak ya, itu tidak ada simptomnya. Nah, terus gimana sih, solusinya gimana ya? So, kita continue ke Profesor Asim punya section kedua. So, Profesor Asim, you can continue to your second section. Thank you. Sorry, Prof, you are on mute.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. Okay, this is the second part. It's a very important part because I'll be talking about platelet itself, and then I'll go to its little bit biochemistry, not too much, and see how it goes. As you know, that the platelet is traditionally associated with cardiovascular attack, because if you look at any patient's prescription, whether because of high blood pressure, they may have a high blood pressure medicine, they may not have it, they may have a diabetic medicine or may not have it, but every cardiovascular patient, even after bypass or stent and with a propensity to develop cardiovascular disease, they must have antiplatelet drugs, either aspirin, Plavix, or clopidogrel. What that means, it underscores the importance of platelets in cardiovascular disease. There is no question about it. So traditionally, platelets are known as a thrombocyte. Its name is thrombocyte itself. That's why thrombosis word comes from platelet. And it is so important, and it is the essential component of cardiovascular disease. There are three components. One is the blood clotting system, one is platelet itself, and there is endothelium, that I'll talk blood vessel things. So all three are very important, but platelet is a central situation because it is also involved in atherosclerotic development. It is involved in the penultimate attack. Cardio aggregation is involved in the in clot formation is very important. And third, we'll talk about immunology and COVID patient, how important it is and how it is making a mess in a COVID patient. Anyhow, I will now talk in this slide. I'm showing it that how the platelets are produced. Platelet itself is not a cell. The complete cell. It does not have a nucleus. It has no capacity to produce new mRNA or protein, but it carries so many things. It is kind of a drone. I used to call it as a reconnaissance flight. Now we call it as a drone. If it needs to, it can kill its enemy. It has a lot of ammunition in it, pre-made already, and it is inside the cell, but it does not have a nucleus. It has a ribosome, protein synthetic machineries. It has mRNA, a vesicle mRNA, when it's produced in the bone marrow, and it carries it. And that's why a lot of virus, like influenza virus, HIV, dengue, etc., including COVID, they can go inside these cells and use its machinery very nicely, especially single-stranded RNA, and then can replicate itself. So that's why it is a main target of COVID virus, this platelet. I'll talk a little bit later. But anyhow, the important is the platelet must be in the circulation 200,000 to 400,000 per millimeter cubes, and its lifespan is 10 days. What is produced today in our body, it will stay for 10 days, then it will die. So that means every day we produce 10% of the platelet. And as I mentioned, it has a fundamental machineries for many critical processes, as we understand. It includes autophagy, it involved in programmed cell death, it involved in cancer, it is involved in the outcome of the COVID patient, and it is because it is highly, highly involved now, as we know, as we understand now, immune response, including inflammatory cardiovascular, even in the brain neurodegeneration and cancer. So platelet immune sense is a very important, that I will talk later on. So platelet is just not as a most important cardiovascular disease, is very important in immune situation. As I mentioned, it goes for cell defragmented and produce these platelets, and it does not have a nucleus, and it is 70% in the blood and 30% in the spleen. That's why when I mention platelet, we call it blood platelet, because in the circulation platelet. And they are there for 10 days, and it has so many things, but everything is inside the cell. We call dormant cells, and it circulates like that. If it becomes active, then is a problem, but it can be active even in young people under different conditions. Oh my goodness, it's not, okay. And there is one thing, just a little bit for your information, is complicated science, but I think you would understand. Because as I mentioned, because nature has given so many doorways to get activated, because platelet activation and aggregation is important for our survival. As I mentioned, if our vessel is cut or something, platelet must be aggregated to go there. And it has a different receptor, collagen receptor. When the endothelium is exposed, collagen is exposed, broken, and collagen activate the platelet, and it can do. And thrombin, when we have a clotting system is activated, thrombin is generated, and thrombin also aggregate the platelet. ADP, adenosine diphosphate, that is released from broken red blood cell, also can activate the platelet. And epinephrine, under stress condition, epinephrine is produced and can activate the platelet. But if you look at inside the cell platelet, there is a arachidonic acid, and arachidonic acid present in the membrane, cell membrane, and it is coming from linoleic acid, omega-6 fatty acid, and that we take much more than 20-30 years back, because in order to reduce the cholesterol level in our body, we reduce the saturated fatty acid, and we now consume oil that contain linoleic acid, that is omega-6 fatty acid, and it is the precursor of arachidonic acid. So in our body, generally we have arachidonic acid, but 50 years ago it was less. Now we have more and more of arachidonic acid. And when this platelet is activated, arachidonic acid is released from the cell membrane, and because of cyclooxygenase, they produce the thromboxane A2, and then thromboxane A2 actually bring back the fibrinogen receptor together, glycoprotein 2B and 3, and then the platelet aggregation happens. So what I'm trying to say, that all these aggregating agents, epinephrine, collagen, thrombin, ADP, they all main job is to liberate arachidonic acid in the platelet membrane, and then this arachidonic acid produce thromboxane A2, and this thromboxane A2 then express the fibrinogen receptor, and platelet aggregation happens. So aspirin that is used as an antiplatelet it is not an antiplatelet drug itself. What it does, it inactivates the cyclooxygenase, which produce thromboxane A2 from arachidonic acid. And if you take aspirin for the 10 days, because we cannot produce new protein, cyclooxygenase enzymes, the platelet become inactive physiologically also. And that's why for 10 days, every day we take, after 10 days, you'll have 90 to 100%, 90, 70% at least, your platelet will be inactivated. It is a so important function apart from aggregation that I'll talk later on, physiology, immunology, it cannot work if you take aspirin. And 30% people are resistant to aspirin. And another thing is that even if somebody take aspirin, if the thrombin comes into play, when the plaque is broken, cardiac attack, real attack is happen, then this thrombin can aggregate the platelet without involving arachidonic acid. So what I'm saying that arachidonic acid is good against collagen, epinephrine, ADP, but it cannot do anything when thrombin is a player. And thrombin is a player in a real cardiac event situation. And under this condition, thrombin, the red line you can see, it can activate the platelet and aggregate the platelet by expressing fibrinogen receptor and other thing happening, and this thing goes on. So aspirin is the main drug at the moment. Everybody is taking aspirin or combination of Playbox, etc., just to stop the expression of the fibrinogen receptor via thromboxane A2. And these are the drugs are being used in combination or by alone. Aspirin is the main, clopidogrel, ticlopidine, and dipyramidine, etc., etc. Their main job is to stop the aggregation of the platelets. But there is a lot of side effect of aspirin. Aspirin is not recommended by FDA in USA and European Cardiology Association to use as a primary prevention drug. Primary prevention is those who don't have cardiovascular disease, but they may develop it because they have diabetes, etc. Aspirin is not suggested because it has a lot of side effect. It stops the prostaglandin production in the gut, and people produce allergy, ulcer, etc. And 30% people are not sensitive to aspirin also across the race. And also side effects are like gastric bleeding, wound formation, aspirin resistance, and also is ineffective against thrombin. So it is not a drug that you can give it to millions of people, those who don't have a expressed cardiovascular disease. So the problem is that with these billions of people, young people to the people who don't have cardiovascular disease, and we know they have a hyperactive platelets and they're producing atherosclerotic plaque formation every day, what they should take to tame this platelet, to inactivate this platelet is an issue when we started this work in 1990. And what we did, I was, that time people are interested of antioxidants, etc., in a cardiovascular disease, but very few people are thinking that way, that the platelet could be an important partner, and we should look for something from natural sources. Although at that time, from Dierberg studies and others in Eskimos and others, he saw that, that taking omega-3 fatty acid, they take 10 grams every day. That's a lot, and they have a higher bleeding time is much more, and their parturition, the baby is coming out much later because of prostaglandin 2 series are less because they take omega-3 fatty acid. But for the normal population in the world, they don't take that much omega-3 fatty acid, and it takes months after months in order to enrich the body, including platelet, with omega-3 fatty acid, so you can replace arachidonic acid with eicosapentaenoic acid, and it will then produce thromboxane A3, not 2, which is not aggregated. That is the rationale that I showed in the previous slide. So that is the situation, and there are some studies with garlic, etc., but study was not convincing, and the benefit is very little. So I was interested to see whether any fruits or that is available in the Western market has anything there to inhibit the platelet aggregation. So we started with a very, very kind of a mundane chemistry. That is, we take the fruits and make an extract, juice out of it, and the pH is very, very low because highly acidic, most of them. So we neutralize the pH, and then we take the blood, we isolate the platelet-rich plasma, and we incubated platelet-rich plasma with different fruit juice. And if you look at the curve on the left side, you will see that the tomato is the most effective inhibitor of platelet aggregation compared to sorry, other fruits. Either it could be apple, it could be orange, etc. They have some activity, but none is close to tomato. And it is nothing to do with the antioxidants, because antioxidant capacity of these fruits more or less same or different places. So this activity is something different and new. Some compounds, which then later we found after a lot of work done, that it has the purified compounds, several compounds. It has the nucleosides, the derivative of a lot of phenolics, flavonoid, glycoside, etc. are the main components that we call later on Fruitflow. And this is the first paper published in Platelets from my lab. It was patented, and later on, that is the published paper was in 2001. And then we also we started calling Fruitflow later on. We showed that, as I mentioned, that there are different aggregating agents that can aggregate the platelet, and it's very important in physiology. The God or whatever, he does not allow just single agent that can activate the platelet. So there are several agents: ADP, collagen, arachidonic acid, thrombin. They are the aggregating agents, so that platelet makes sure the platelet aggregates. And what we did, we then compared with aspirin versus tomato extract, which is the best one. If we look at the left side, aspirin is good against arachidonic acid, because as I mentioned, aspirin is an inhibitor of cyclooxygenase only, and not others. And these things, and it can inhibit these things. Whereas tomato extract, which inhibits aggregating agents, all the including thrombin. Thrombin is the killer when the attack is happening. And aspirin is nothing to do with it. It cannot do anything. But this humble tomato extract, it is a multi-pronged approach. It can inhibit all these aggregating agents, including thrombin, and it makes it very ideal and much better when it comes to inhibiting platelet aggregation. And this study was published later on. And if you look at our papers, you will find there are 9 or 10 trials happens we using these components. We call it Fruitflow now, and we developed how it works with a different mechanism. As I mentioned, platelet is an anucleated cell, but it has batteries of receptors for aggregation, for so many things, activating neutrophils that I will talk later on, immune function, etc. And most of them are really inhibited by Fruitflow and by different pathways, where the aspirin is only one pathway that inhibit cyclooxygenase only. And in this trial, we noticed there is no effect on other segment of the cardiovascular system. It does not affect clotting time. It does not affect prothrombin time, and no adverse effects are noticed, because it is possible. Although 100 years ago, the tomato use is happening, but tomato has been used extensively in all kind of civilizations and their cooking system, etc. And of course, there is no effect. And this is no addition of outside any compound. It is a simple isolation of the active fraction by reductive methods. So it's a very natural, and it has a water-soluble compound. It is a heat stable, very soluble, and easily absorbed within 1.5 hours or so. As I may see in this last slide, this is showing that comparison of volunteers with and without tomato extract, they're showing that after it is showing up to 6 hours. If you look at the platelet aggregation, there is a dropping up to 23% after consuming this Fruitflow, whereas there is a control here. And this effect can go up to 18 hours. That is very important. It is reversible also. In aspirin, if you started taking it, it can continue up to 10 days. As long as the platelet survives, it is inactivated. It cannot take part any other physiological function. And that's why if somebody needs surgery, etc., aspirin is no-go. But with this one, every 24 hours, you need another dose to maintain the platelet inactivation of 10, 20 to 30%. You cannot make platelet 70%, 80% inhibition, then there is a bleeding problem, other problem can happen. And this work was published in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2006. And after all this dossier we prepared from Provexis, and it is then approved by European Food Standard Agency after seeing all the human trial data, scientific data, reproducibility, etc. This is the first European approved food, functional food in Europe by European Food Standard. It's the first one. And it is mentioned, it is allowed to say that it helps maintain normal platelet aggregation and contribute healthy blood flow. And this was the first claim authorized by European Union Commission in 2010. And what it has, now the Fruitflow is being sold all over the world by DSM. It has a 150 milligram capsules. It contains 65 milligram of active compounds, 6 to 10% of known nucleoside derivatives, 13 to 15%, almost 10 milligrams are known phenolic conjugates, and it has a 8 to 10%, 7 milligram of flavonoid derivatives, and it has a minimum 2.4 milligrams of quercetin. It's very important when I'll come to COVID situation, and there are a lot of unknowns still there. So this is the latest situation. Then we try to compare with in a human trial to see how it compares with if somebody takes 7 days continuously, normal healthy volunteer 75 milligram aspirin versus 150 milligram of tomato extract or Fruitflow. As you see here, that time to clot is only increased 4%, so is less effective. Platelet aggregation is 13 to 36% that we allowed is decreased, whereas after 7 days, it is 90% is aggregation is decreased activity by taking aspirin, and it has a 19% they don't respond. The general is 25 to 30%. They don't respond to aspirin at all, and if you take aspirin regularly, but no doctor checks whether their patient taking aspirin, whether it is affecting platelet or not, because it is not the way it is. And they have gastric problems and others. And whereas this tomato extract, even you take every day, it still it maintains the physiology of the platelet, but it takes off 25% of platelet aggregation, 13 to 36%, which is quite good. The hyperactivity of the platelet is reduced, but it maintains the other function and physiology. So that means it can be used as a primary prevention, where this aspirin, in normal people, if it takes it, then it loses the platelet activity by 90% or more, and a lot of side effects. And that's why it is not allowed to have a aspirin regularly for normal, apparently healthy population. So this study was published in European Journal of Nutrition, and it is clearly showing that tomato extract, if you take regularly, you maintain the physiology of the cardiovascular system, whereas in aspirin, as we know, that it has a irreversible inhibitory effects on platelet and with the side effects. So it is not recommended to take every day for everybody. Then we did one study to show that, because angiotensin converting enzymes is producing angiotensin is one of the, there are several mechanisms that blood pressure is maintained in the body. And we know from some other studies that polyphenols, etc., can lower the blood pressure by inhibiting the angiotensin converting enzymes. So we did a very small trial in Oslo University through 12 people, and we measured 24 hours blood pressure monitors against placebo with 150 milligram of tomato extract, aqueous extract, or Fruitflow. And if you see here that there is only 24-hour study, and we showed that taking tomato extract or Fruitflow 150 milligram, you reduce the blood pressure in these people. Whereas in placebo, there is no effect. As you see in the right side, it is showing that there is quite a good decrease in blood pressure. And even 2% decrease is quite helpful in order to reduce the cardiovascular event. So this Fruitflow is not only reducing reversibly platelet aggregation. It also lowers the blood pressure in human body, and also in vitro we showed that is directly inhibiting angiotensin converting enzymes. And this is the catalog of all the human trial done. There are 9 trials I can see here that is showing all the benefits, all actually targeted platelet aggregation in vitro. That means after consuming this extract with placebo, compared with placebo, and we measured the changes in the platelet response to ADP, and also we measure total clotting time, and in some cases blood pressure time, and we found always there is a significant effect. And there is also other study going published in Poland and showing the similar situation as we showed here. They mentioned WSTC, that means Fruitflow, that's water soluble tomato concentrate. 2 means is a tomato extract, and there are several reviews is mentioned here, and as you see, there is a lot of papers. You can Google and find it out. I'll not waste time in this here. And our latest paper is in submission at the moment. We are waiting. That is, we are trying to find out what would be the minimum amount of Fruitflow people should get to get the effect. And now there's time for summary, and I will ask Wanda to summarize now whatever I talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Asim. Bapak Ibu sekalian, mengambil kesimpulan dari section 2 yang sudah disampaikan oleh Profesor Asim. Jadi tadi kalau balik ke section pertama, bahwa kerusakan pembuluh darah itu bisa disebabkan oleh banyak hal ya, mulai dari hipertensi, kemudian diabetes, kemudian kita makan makanan yang banyak lemak, kemudian smoking, merokok, dan juga kebanyakan duduk, ataupun exercise yang terlalu banyak pun sebenarnya bisa memicu kerusakan pembuluh darah. Nah, kerusakan pembuluh darah itu dapat memicu hiperaktif trombosit. Ya, yang tadi saya sudah bilang, kalau misalnya fungsi trombosit itu adalah, kalau kita luka, dia adalah fungsi untuk menyembuhkan luka tersebut ya, untuk aggregate lukanya kita. Tapi kalau misalnya tidak ada luka, terus tiba-tiba dia aktif, dia akan menyebabkan penyumbatan ya, karena dia lengket satu sama lain. Jadi terlalu hiperaktif dan dia akan lengket satu sama lain dan menempel di dinding pembuluh darah kita. Nah, bila kita berbicara mengenai penggunaan obat pengencer darah ya, di dunia ini mungkin kita kenal dengan aspirin. Cuman di Indonesia harusnya dipakai yang satu lagi, yang clopidogrel ya. Itu juga adalah salah satu obat pengencer darah yang sering dikonsumsi oleh mereka yang sudah mengidap penyakit yang berkaitan dengan kardiovaskular. Namun aspirin ataupun obat-obat pengencer darah itu tidak disarankan sebagai pencegahan, ya, bukan pencegahan. Karena aspirin memiliki efek samping yang diketahui dan tidak direkomendasikan. Tadi kalau kita lihat mulai dari gastric bleeding, bisa pendarahan di gastrik, kemudian 30% orang di dunia tidak bisa menerima aspirin atau badannya tidak memiliki efek, ya, aspirin tidak memiliki efek ke badannya, 30% orang. Ya, Kemudian kalau kita tadi mendengarkan paparan dari Profesor Asim bahwa banyak zat-zat atau molekul yang digunakan untuk mengaktifasi si platelet atau trombosit. Jadi ada 4 tadi, ada ADP, ada kolagen, trombin, arachidonik acid ya. Arachidonik acid yang utama sebenarnya. Jadi aspirin itu meregulasi si arachidonik acid supaya tidak terjadi penggumpalan. Namun aspirin ini tidak bisa meregulasi trombin. Jadi trombin hanya bisa diregulasi sama si Fruitflow supaya tidak terjadi hiperaktif trombosit ya, tidak terjadi hiperagregasi kalau kita bilang ya, tidak terjadi hiperkoagulasi. Jadi akhirnya di tahun 90-an Profesor Asim mulai nih mencari, karena waktu tahun 90-an itu banyak profesor, banyak peneliti mulai meneliti sayur-sayuran dan buah-buahan yang berkaitan dan bisa menyembuhkan atau mencegah penyakit kardiovaskular. Nah, mungkin di tahun 90-an itu meramai dengan omega 3 atau fish oil ya. Itu. Tapi ternyata omega 3 dan fish oil pun tidak cukup baik untuk mencegah hiperaktif trombosit. Jadi akhirnya Profesor Asim mulai nih mulai ke pasar ya, mulai ke supermarket, beli semua jenis-jenis buah-buahan, jenis sayur-sayuran, kemudian di jus, diekstrak, kemudian dicobakan ke plasma platelet ya, ke plasma trombosit, dicek mana nih dari buah-buahan tersebut yang memiliki efek antikoagulasi yang paling tinggi. Nah, ternyata ekstrak tomat ini, tomat yang punyai hasil antikoagulasi yang paling tinggi. Nah, cuman untuk di Fruitflow bukan berarti itu jus tomat di jus diekstrak kemudian kita masukkan ke dalam SOP Subarashi ya, bukan ya. Ada cara-cara khusus vaksinasi selektif yang mungkin ya kita tidak bisa kasih tahu ya karena ini confidential metodenya yang kita lakukan supaya menjadi sebuah Fruitflow yang bisa meningkatkan lower atau merendahkan aktivitas koagulasi pada trombosit. Begitu. Oke, kemudian Fruitflow juga heat stable ya. Jadi dia tahan terhadap panas, water soluble juga, dan Fruitflow tidak memberikan efek samping seperti aspirin. Ya, jadi kalau kita lihat tadi hasil clinical trial-nya setelah 3 jam pun kita bisa langsung merasakan hasil dari si Fruitflow. Hasil kalau misalnya kita cek darah nih, setelah kita 3 jam mengonsumsi Fruitflow, kita bisa melihat nih kadar trombosit koagulasi kita menurun atau naik. Nah, ternyata setelah 3 jam kita bisa lihat bahwa kadar koagulasi trombosit itu menurun. Nah, kemudian itu bisa bertahan sampai 18 jam. Jadi setelah 18 jam kalau kita nggak konsumsi lagi, dia akan kembali lagi. Dan kalau kita nggak konsumsi Fruitflow, bisa jadi makin hiperaktif. Jadi makanya di sini Fruitflow sangat bagus untuk mencegah ya. Sekali lagi mencegah, bukan berarti mengobati ya, mencegah ya, membantu menjaga agregasi trombosit yang normal sehingga berkontribusi pada aliran darah yang sehat. Kemudian kita juga lihat tadi ada clinical trial. Dalam 24 jam ketika setelah mengonsumsi Fruitflow juga terbukti dapat menurunkan tekanan darah yang tinggi. Ya. Jadi kurang lebih begitu key takeaways dari section 2 ini. So let's continue to section 3 di mana Profesor Asim akan bicara lebih mengenai COVID ya. So Profesor Asim, the time and place yours. You're mute, sorry.
Thank you, Wanda. Now I'll go to the third one, and I think is very important in terms of what is going on these days in COVID-19 pandemic. As I mentioned, that platelets are coming from the situation of cardiovascular system. And traditionally, last 100 years, people are thinking platelet is mostly involved in clot formation and is very important. That's why the aspirin used all over the world. And but later on, 20 years back, it is shown that it is involved in atherosclerotic plaque formation as we develop ourselves because of a lack of activity, bad diet, etc., and pre-diabetic condition, insulin resistance, etc. It is important in atherosclerotic formation, but we don't have an arms ammunition or anything that can stop the platelet become active, and because aspirin cannot be used. So that's why the alternative dietary source having been sought, and thankfully Fruitflow is the only dietary factors, functional food, so far is the most well studied, and so many human trials, etc., actually putting Fruitflow in the top of the alternative to aspirin as a dietary regimen without any side effect and reversibility effect, and also it also reduces the blood pressure maintenance. But today this part is very important, because if you look at any COVID patient, what happens? So this COVID virus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, is a single-stranded RNA virus, and it is infecting our body with the help of ACE2, angiotensin converting enzyme 2, and wherever it is there, it can use as a door to go inside the cell. Even there is a study these days showing that platelet also has this sort of receptor for virus. So virus can go inside the platelet, and there are a lot of studies I'll show you it can go and can use the machineries, because platelet does not have a nucleus. It has a ribosome protein synthesizing machinery because it carries mRNA. So it can produce some protein like factor 5, etc. when it is needed. But this virus, all these, as I mentioned, influenza virus, etc., they go inside and then they do the havoc along with other cell with platelet. And then platelet can produce so many cytokines, I'll come later on, and can create immune problems. And so the question is how we can solve this problem. And traditionally, in this slide, I'll show you that the virus and human blood platelets, what is the relationship? As I mentioned, the platelet become hyperactive by also in infection, like influenza, dengue fever infection there is a problem of platelet hyperactivity, and also the reduction of the platelet number, because platelets are highly consumed. Platelet life is only 10 days. And it also, there is a mechanism, because platelets are produced in the bone marrow. It sends a signal to bone marrow not to produce too much platelet, because then it will be used by virus, and then it's a big problem. So this is one of the mechanisms. Other mechanism is because of so much aggregation going on, platelets are being used, and you have a certain limitation to produce that much of platelet. So there is a thrombocytopenia, that's a less number of platelet. And this is also a problem. At the same time, platelets are very active because of different situations that I'll come on later on. Because if I go in general, what can happen? That is, platelet becomes hyperactive and release so many cytokines, inflammatory cytokines. But platelet also have an antiviral response. It tries to clear the virus from the circulation by different mechanisms. It interacts with the neutrophils or leukocytes and trying to make a trap, so virus can go there and can be released. Virus also has several mechanisms that I'll come later on to target the platelet, different mechanisms, so that it can use a very easy host, so it can replicate also a lot. And also it can use you as a transport, go here and there, because the blood is flowing, not in the tissue. So it can go to anywhere it likes to. So it's very important that these cells has the capacity, has the potential to take the virus and go take it different places in the body. And as I mentioned, single-stranded RNA is the ideal in this case, because platelet has protein machinery and it can use it, and also transporting here and there. And platelet, there is a mechanism, it's called neuroaminidase, that affected in the platelet. So there is less production of the platelet. And as I mentioned, platelet also releases alpha. Platelet has several granules, alpha granules, beta granules. These are the arms ammunition inside the cytoplasm. And it can release, when it is activated, when the virus goes inside the cell, it brings up to the membrane and releases so many compounds, including PF4, platelet factor 4. It is a chemotactic agent. It brings leukocytes together and it can produce antiviral agents. So antiviral kind of trap. And also platelet has a specific antibody, IgC, that neutralizes many viruses. So the struggle is going on between the virus and the platelet, as also in other cell studies going on. Platelet also have toll-like receptor, TLR. Platelet can sense which is pathogen, which is not pathogen. And through TLR, the virus can go there, and then it can produce so many signals, an aggregating agent that can bring all these blood cells together and try to fight against the virus. Platelet, or through the TLR, it can also degrade the virus and can present the part of the protein of the virus, of the membranes of the virus to the outside cell membrane, which is through MAC1. You know, the major histocomplexities complex, one is present in every cell. it is very important. And MHC2 is present only antigen presenting cell, few cells, dendritic cells, macrophages, etc. But platelet, except the red blood cell, this MHC1 is present. The function of the MHC1 is this: if it takes the endogenous cell protein and expresses on the cell surface, then natural killer cell or that T cells will not kill the cells or platelet or any other cell. But if it is foreign protein, like in viral protein, it is present in MHC1, then it attracts the other leukocytes to bind there and say, I'm affected. And it happens in cancer cell also. When the cancer cell produces its own protein, but it is not seen as a prone protein, then the natural killer cell will kill the cancer. It's a self-suicidal thing. But here it is a complicated little bit. The virus fragments it becomes antigen. Platelet itself become immune cell, antigen presenting cells, and producing the viral signature into MHC1 and asking leukocyte to come and help me, and this virus is affected. And all these things function. We really, at the moment, we don't know if the aspirin is taken regular basis, what impact they have. Because this is nothing to do with cyclooxygenase pathway. It is a completely physiological pathway. But one thing we know, that for 10 days, if somebody take aspirin, this sort of activity may be compromised, and is a big problem, because we are trying to make sure that platelet does not take part in the aggregation and clotting process. That's why the aspirin is given in cardiovascular patient. But doing that, we might be actually compromising other physiological action, including inflammation, etc., and antigen presenting other activity, and taking virus to different places in order to kill, or virus to win the game. So something can happen. So as I mentioned so far, the hemostatic function is very important for platelet, but we know now it is as important in immunosurveillance. That's why you will find the doctors are very worried about platelet function in COVID patient, because COVID viral infection, viral disease is a completely immune disorders. It is the struggle between immunity, innate and adaptive immunity of the host versus the pathogen. This is as simple as it is. Although the side effect is breathlessness, etc., but people die of cardiovascular things, and cardiovascular platelet clot is found in every tissue in the COVID patient. So it is a big thing. And also this immune surveillance, that is a new role, a very important role of the platelet. More and more data is coming, actually showing this thing. And that is a challenge for us to find out that we have to have some kind of product which will inhibit platelet to act as a platelet aggregating agents, but not inhibiting its immune function or immunosurveillance. This is very important. And that is what is going on at the moment. Because of aspirin, we don't know, probably is working or not. As I mentioned, that when the virus comes, it produces so many cytokines, it affects endothelium surface, and endothelium surface problem means it activates so many adhesive molecules, von Willebrand factors, etc., and platelet become activated because of this and try to be in a prothrombotic state, and that lead to several thrombosis or platelet, microplatelet aggregate, etc. And also it is a very two-sword actually situation. It is also we found that COVID-19 is associated with hyperplatelet activity. At the same time, it reduces the platelet count. It could be different mechanism. One is the heavy use of platelet that we see in preeclampsia in hospital mothers, because they use the intravascular coil, that the platelet is highly consumed. The platelet number is not there. And also some virus has a capacity to stop the platelet if it is too much aggressive there by acting on neuroimmunities. And other thing COVID does is actually it is activating endothelium and making hypercoagulability surface on the endothelium. Because in endothelium, nitric oxide and prostacyclin are the most important platelet inhibitory product. And this is produced less because if endothelium surface is gone. But some of the product like arginine, quercetin, etc., that can activate the nitric oxide and prostacyclin, and that makes the endothelium integrity is all right. So platelet is can be activated by virus as well as contribute to the above mechanism by depending what situation it is there. And there is a three things happens in COVID patient. One is a coagulopathy, high blood clotting factor, because that will come later on why the coagulation is more increased, thrombocytopathy, thrombotic tendency, and endotheliopathy. Endothelial is gone because of the virus interacting with the vessel wall surface. Because of ACE2 receptor, it goes inside and making this, and all this causing a vast consumption of the platelet, and also because platelets are aggregated, forming aggregates, and also damaging different tissues, and ultimately death. Now, if we then compare that what is going on the basis of the understanding of the thrombocytopathy and endotheliopathy, therapies are directed towards platelet activation. How we can stop platelet activation and apoptosis, the platelet death, and improving the endothelial cell health that may be effective against the COVID-19. Endotheliopathy means is increased level of von Willebrand factors. I showed you initially that the vessel wall is getting bumpy because of so many adhesive factors are there, and factor 8, and thrombomodulin is increased soluble because thrombomodulin bind thrombin, and that's why thrombin cannot activate the coagulation system and aggregation. But when the endothelium is broken because of the viral infection, this thrombomodulin is increased. Soluble P-selectin is increased. Vascular endothelial growth factor is increased. Factor 5 is increased by this, all by endothelium cells, as well as plasminogen activator inhibitor 1. That is a thing that is inhibiting the plasmin, so it cannot dissolve the clot. And this product is, this inhibitor of clot dissolver is increased. And also it lowers the prostacyclin and nitric oxide synthesis. So these are happening in the endothelium when there is a COVID infection is there. And thrombocytopathy means platelet reduction is there in 50%, not all cases. There are reports, but 50% cases I saw there is a decrease in platelet. Depends when you see the patient. And increase the P-selectin. This is very important in terms of platelet aggregation, and CD40L on the cell surface. And it also increases so many cytokines, and these things is happening. And the most important thing is, of course, this nitric oxide and prostacyclin production in endothelium is also compromised because endothelium integrity is lost in COVID-19. So what happened when the COVID infection, SARS virus infect any cells, including platelet, it produces inflammation, cytokines, and it can lead to cytokine storms that we measure by interleukin-6 and others. And platelet, it has been shown that platelet gene expression is altered, obviously, because the virus is increasing the platelet and enters into the platelet and take the machineries and produce the protein, and gene expression is happening there. But the data is not solid yet, but it is there. And also then platelet interact with so many immune cells because of platelet become active, and they produce so many receptors that binds the leukocyte, etc., and ultimately produce a trap. And of course, platelet become hyperactive, try to aggregate all the time. So this is happening, as we see in a mild cases in diabetes and apparently unhealthy situation, but COVID-19 is directly entering into the platelet, doing this also through the production of the cytokines in monocyte and macrophages, and complement system is activated and platelet become active. Now, there are the two mechanisms where this thing happening. One is, as I see the left side, the SARS virus can go, it is not clear yet, the last week data showing that it can go inside the platelet, and then platelet has a TLR receptor, toll-like receptors, which actually take over the degraded virus fragments, and it gives to, through the TLR7 MYD88, it produces second signaling systems, it activates neutrophils and produce DNA and produce microbial mitochondrial DNA combination, and it could be taking into immune situation. And this is very important, the way this virus is going inside the cell and taking over the machinery for its own replication. At the same time, it is taking its machineries to produce, to activate the neutrophil and DNAs and take part in immune situation. Now, if you go to the left side, as we know that, as I mentioned, left side, that platelet is activated, and activated means platelet aggregation will be more, secretion will be more, platelet will be more adhesive to the vascular bed, and the blood flow will be compromised. Everything can happen. And this can happen through different mechanisms that I mentioned a little bit much more, but this can happen. Now, the question is, most of the pre-COVID patients, they may not have taken any antiplatelet dietary regimens or aspirin, forget it, because apparently healthy people, because aspirin cannot be used as a primary prevention. Under this condition, if somebody take Fruitflow, obviously the activation of the platelet would be less and aggregation would be less, and it will have a less addition situation, and the SARS virus can make a less mess on these cells. At the same time, since it is not directly strongly affecting psychology exogenous, it maintains the physiology. So depending on the situation, it can also try to kill or try to clear the virus from the cell. It cannot happen if somebody is not taking a drug which actually pro-physiologic or pro-platelet, which allow the platelet to do these jobs, just not like aspirin, but Fruitflow, because it contains so many antioxidants, so many polyphenols, etc., that might help to platelet to affect physiologically in order to prevent the severity of the COVID virus. And as you see here in this slide, that as I mentioned, in addition to thrombosis hemostasis, platelet is important, is a key inflammatory and immune response, and we call it immunothrombosis. That is happening any viral infection, it can happen, but much more in COVID virus. As I mentioned, that COVID virus that can enter into the cell by ACE2, and then it can be through the toll-like receptor 7, 2, or 4, it can be activated, and that lead to platelet aggregation, cytokine released by the platelet, and that lead to thrombosis. And it also involved in leukocyte infiltration and produce net formation, and that can actually trap the virus more, but it can lead to also thrombosis, and also it can TLR3 activate the complement system. It activates the coagulation activation, and fibrin deposition is there. But if your platelet is inactive, then the coagulation may not be affecting that way. So this is a situation where we have the virus is taking over the platelet, and it can reduce the platelet number, thrombocytopenia, but at the same time, it is making very hyperactive platelet. So the important thing is that the platelet in a physiological condition, it should have express broad array of receptor, like toll receptor, so it can process the viral pathogen, and it can sense the pathogen, and it can immediately produce the immune response that really releases cytokine that can, and it has also antimicrobial peptide it can release, and directly inviting neutrophils and monocyte and lymphocyte to amplify the immune response, to stop the action of the SARS virus. And as I mentioned, if it fails to do that, if it does not have it become inactive because of aspirin, we don't know yet, but is a possibility is there, then it cannot do anything, and that we call it immunothrombosis, because immune functions are more predominant under this condition and lead to thrombosis situation. And in this cartoon, I try to elaborate much more. You'll see later on in my paper, will be coming soon, that vessel wall damage by virus, the normal situation, if there is a vessel wall damage, the physiological platelet activation happen, and then activated platelet can produce thrombus formation, and then can stop the blood flow, and produce, and then it can be dissolved later on, and you have a nice endothelium again resolution. This is called hemostasis. But when there is a situation that I talked about, obesity, diabetes, sedentary lifestyle, smoking, and others that lead to pathological platelet hyperactivation, and also it can be by SARS virus and other influenza virus and others that can lead to platelet hyperactivation, and also immune autoantibodies, etc., can lead to, and hypoxic condition also can lead to hyperactivation that can happen in COVID patient. And this hyperactive platelet can do all this damage, including inflammation, thrombus formation, and also this COVID virus can damage endothelium, but also platelet aggregation can damage endothelium, and platelet can be died down soon, and things can happen. And there is another mechanism is much in progress, so that it is a kind of a protection. But if it is the platelet consumption more or clearance more, so that the virus cannot use the platelet more, in doing that, the platelet count could be dangerously low and can create other problem, which you call it thrombocytopenia. And as I mentioned, endothelium produces so many things involving thrombosis, antithrombosis, as well as fibrinolysis. When the clot is formed, it should be dissolved, and the product called PI1 or plasmin, these are important, and this can be damaged, can be reduced or compromised because of the damaged endothelium by the virus or the inappropriate platelet aggregation. And all these things can be better off if we have regular platelet function physiologically, so that we have more of platelet physiology, which can take part as a preventive or as a protective of the endothelium and itself. And also it can produce things through TLR, etc., that can lead to the product, which can bring back neutrophil, etc., to make a immune umbrella, so that virus can be tagged and targeted and can be cleared. And this is another one showing that under inflammatory conditions, what can happen. As I said, the resting platelet that we have now, most of the people, it does not have anything to do with endothelium. It flows around and the body, billions of platelet, their main job is to look into the problems. But when platelet itself is activated because of stress, because of obesity, diabetes, etc., then it can go to hyperactive state and try to interact with the vessel wall. But the vessel wall can be also activated by so many activities, diet, etc. And that interaction lead to thrombus formation, and that lead to cardiovascular problems. And of course, the most important thing is endothelium non-thrombotic surface is maintained mostly by nitric oxide, prostacyclin, that also interact with the platelets, so that platelet does not aggregate, etc., and things there. And we have a low dose aspirin that we use in the cardiovascular patient. We use purinergic receptor situation and nitric oxide producing agents, prostacyclin, antioxidant, statin, etc., has some effect. But Fruitflow, we believe strongly, and the data is showing that they can physiologically inactivate the platelet, so it does not aggregate. It may not be compromising the platelet other physiological activity, and also because of it contain quercetin and others, it can help in the nitric oxide productions and antioxidant. It has a lot, so it can affect the endothelium function also. So if we summarize whatever I say, the COVID-19, the main thing is happening, people are dying because of cytokine storms, damaging tissue, etc. That way we have a breathlessness, lung function cannot work. And also it goes to the endothelium surface is damaged, platelet is damaged, and platelet, the COVID-19 using platelet as a replication thing, and also as a producing cytokine, etc. And also it can produce thrombocytopenic conditions, and including generation of thrombin, etc., that can affect. That's why anticoagulant is used by doctors in order to maintain the coagulation, all this. And And these things also platelet hyperactivation. Although number is less, platelet become very active. So under this condition, we believe that Fruitflow may be very useful as a preventive, especially, and not under very severe conditions. This Fruitflow can be used so that the platelet physiology is maintained and thromboinflammation is maintained, is not occurring, so that the patency is maintained and the good flow of the platelet is maintained, and innate immunity is maintained. And in that way, we can stop the COVID-19 multiplication in the body. So this is the third part I just finished, and I will now request Wanda to summarize in Bhasha. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Asim. Oke, jadi Bapak Ibu sekalian itu terkait COVID-19 dan platelet atau trombosit ya. Jadi banyak kejadian korban COVID-19 itu meninggal akibat koagulasi, akibat penggumpalan darah. Ya, karena penggumpalan darah ini juga disebabkan banyak karena adanya trombosis, yaitu tadi trombosit yang terlalu aktif ya, terlalu hiperaktif. Jadi kalau misalkan virus masuk ke tubuh kita, kemudian masuk ke dinding sel pembuluh darah kita, itu akan memberikan signal supaya si trombosit ini menjadi aktif. Ketika trombosit menjadi aktif, ada beberapa hal yang sebenarnya si trombosit bisa lakukan, yaitu dia menjadi aktif ya, kemudian dia memanggil teman-temannya itu si sel darah putih, ya, ada neutrofil ya untuk membunuh virus tersebut. Kalau tapi bisa jadi banyak hal yang bisa terjadi ya. Satu tadi bisa menyebabkan si platelet, produksi plateletnya kurang. Kalau misalkan produksi plateletnya kurang, otomatis tidak bisa memanggil si sel darah putih untuk melawan si SARS-CoV atau si COVID-19-nya. Kemungkinan kedua adalah tadi trombosis, ya, koagulopati, ya, itu bisa menimbulkan atau memicu penggumpalan darah. Kalau misalkan penggumpalan darah, otomatis akan menstop aliran darah kita ke organ-organ ya. Jadi banyak kasus COVID-19 yang seperti itu. Ya, kemudian kita percaya bahwa Fruitflow mungkin bukan obat ya, tapi bisa mencegah terjadinya hiperaktif daripada si trombosit ini. Nah, kenapa sih banyak orang-orang yang komorbid, ya, yang diabetes, yang aging, yang obesity itu sangat rentan terhadap COVID-19? Karena pada dasarnya orang-orang yang sudah memiliki komorbid sudah memiliki kondisi trombosit yang hiperaktif. Kemudian SARS-COVID datang, jadi si trombositnya makin hiperaktif lagi. Jadi menimbulkan banyak tadi ya, banyak disorder kalau kita bisa bilang. Ya, jadi banyak juga yang kita sering dengar, oh badai sitokin. Nah itu juga asalnya dari sini, begitu. Jadi mengonsumsi COVID di kondisi COVID-19 sekarang, ya amit-amit lah jangan sampai kena. Kalau misal kena pun, at least kita bisa nih mengurangi atau mencegah terjadinya hiperaktivasi trombosit ya yang terjadi di dalam darah kita. Jangan sampai kita memiliki aliran darah yang tidak sehat seperti itu. Baik, selesai sudah section 3. Professor Asim, you may continue. Sorry.
This is the last slide I will conclude from here. As I mentioned, that can you hear me? Yeah. This is a human non-activated platelet, act as a autonomous drones, both for hemostatic and immunosurveillance. As I mentioned, we have a 62,000 miles of blood vessel it has to look for, and it makes sure it works. And that's why it's very important how we handle this platelet. And use of irreversible antiplatelet drug is necessary in some cases, but it may compromise the non-hemostatic function of circulating platelets, we don't know. And our several in vitro and human trials demonstrated the efficacy of Fruitflow in promoting blood flow, lowering hypertension, and also it has been shown in an in vitro study that it has several anti-inflammatory actions, published 4 or 5 years ago. And due to the presence of water soluble of various bioactive compounds and easily absorbed in the body. So we believe that Fruitflow, especially before and during the early stage of COVID-19 illness, can have a very good effect on the severity of the illness because it can promote the platelets antiviral activities by different mechanism, as well as it is not making very inactive in the circulation as aspirin or other drug does. So thank you very much for listening me and giving me opportunity to share the science build up last 20 years. And now, thank you all. And now I think it's time to answering the questions. If you have some, maybe 10, 15 minutes.
Yep, Professor Asim.
Okay,
Thank you
can
so much.
I stop sharing now so that I can
Yep.
go now? Yeah.
Yep.
All
Oke.
right.
So, ya, Pak Niko mungkin
Ya,
dari
mungkin
AFC ada
ya mungkin
pertanyaan.
saya
Ya.
mewakili aja ya pertanyaan-pertanyaannya. Saya tanyanya bahasa Inggris aja ya ke Prof. Asim. Hello, Prof. Asim.
Ya, Inggris aja, Pak.
Hello, hello.
Thank
Hi.
you for the opportunity to ask for your lecture. So maybe I will ask a few questions about the summarize of your presentation. So if the COVID patient has already been given anticoagulant therapy or are going to be given anticoagulant therapy, should we advise Fruitflow or discontinue it?
I think that is difficult to answer at the moment because we don't have a data with the COVID patient with these things. Our main thing, it is a functional food and dietary supplements, and no study done with the patient yet, cardiovascular patient. So under this condition, if whenever the anticoagulant is given, in most cases, there is no way to, if the platelet number is also less, then we should not use the Fruitflow or aspirin under this condition.
Okay.
Any other question?
Should we stop Fruitflow? Is there correlated about that?
Yeah, if the patient is in the hospital, and obviously then most of the medication will be discussed and under the jurisdiction of the medical doctors, actually. So they will decide, and the patient situation will guide whether we should give the antiplatelet agent, including Fruitflow. This is a completely doctor's prerogative, actually. Okay. But what I'm trying to say that if we take in an early situation or pre-COVID-19, this would help so that the severity of the COVID patient will be less and less because of the platelet will be effectively working physiologically than under any other conditions.
Hello?
Hello. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
And last question, maybe if patient already consuming aspirin or some drug medicine, should we lower the doses or time consuming for Fruitflow?
Yeah, there is a study done with aspirin plus Fruitflow, because you see, if somebody is taking aspirin, there is already 70–80% reduction of platelet activity is done by irreversible inhibition of aspirin. So addition of Fruitflow when it comes to a platelet aggregation may not be that useful because aspirin already making inactive platelet in the body. So our question is, our target is those people who are not taking aspirin and not as a primary prevention. Under this condition, the Fruitflow must be taken. But if somebody is taking aspirin all the time, say patient and things like that, you may not get the additional benefit because when it comes of hemostasis, because aspirin taking every day, chronical use, if somebody is resistant to aspirin, that's a different issue. Then you have to see whether the platelet aggregation is affected by taking aspirin. We found 2 to 3 per 10 patient does not, aspirin cannot stop the platelet aggregation. But if somebody's aspirin is working, then 70-80% inhibition is there, so you don't gain much.
Okay. The last question, according your presentation, is there any maximum daily allowance for Fruitflow, and how about the side effect?
Okay, I think we have trial with up to 300 milligram. That is okay so far,
Okay.
and 150 milligram is per day generally recommended, and we don't see any side effect, and we don't expect to see either, because if you look at find the goulash and other culinary in Hungary, they take 2 kilo, 1 kilo tomato. Tomato is used like anything. So I don't expect any side effect, or we didn't find any side effect in any trial so far from this Fruitflow.
Okay, so maybe we just want to thank you to Prof. Asim, for Rudy, for Prof. Taichi also. Thank you for Wanda also for translating in Indonesia. So it's very good opportunity for us for welcome you in this presentation to more know about Fruitflow. So I hope maybe kesimpulannya ya teman-teman, mudah-mudahan kalian semua bisa pahami. Nanti kita akan cariin dokter juga yang bisa bantuin translating presentation dalam versi Indonesia tentang manfaat Fruitflow. Tapi buat kesimpulannya teman-teman, ini paling bagus dikonsumsi sekarang untuk mencegah, dimana buat kesehatan pembuluh darah dan agresi trombosit kita ya teman-teman ya. Mudah-mudahan presentasi ini ini akan direkam, nanti kita akan bawain secara Indonesia, nanti translatein dari yang penjelasan mereka semua, baru kita upload ke teman-teman semua untuk bisa nyimak lebih baik. So kita mudah-mudahan kalian bisa say thank you dulu ke teman-teman semua. Saya akan buka chatnya. Thank you for Rudy, Taichi, and Prof. Asim. Terutama juga buat Wanda yang bikin make it happen presentasi hari ini. Mudah-mudahan kalian bisa tahu benefit selain dari manfaat subarasi, ada SOP kan. Kalian sekarang jadi tahu lebih Fruitflow, dan kita akan janji ke kalian atur seminar medis yang bahas Fruitflow dari presentasi dari DSM ini, yang dimana masih banyak yang rooming ya tadi bahasa Inggris ya. Tadi saya lihat banyak yang mukanya nggak ngerti-ngerti sih, mukanya begini aja. So, teman-teman, kita mau bilang terima kasih buat semuanya. Mudah-mudahan kalian bisa, tadi dari Rudy juga udah ngomong bahwa dosis yang paling bagus sih untuk kalian ngejar semua hasil ilmiahnya tadi, uji klinisnya, yaitu 3-4 saset subarasi ya teman-teman ya. Itu untuk ngejar kalian yang maintain untuk sehat. Mudah-mudahan kita bisa lalui COVID ini semua, mudah-mudahan teman-teman selalu sehat. Mudah-mudahan kita akan bawain tim medis yang lain, ahli-ahli yang lain dari internasional untuk jelasin ingredient-ingredient. So thank you Prof. Thank you once again for Prof. Asim, Rudy, and Taichi. Thank you for having us. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.